the conference, Turning the Tide, is the theme. Everyone's talking about the end of AIDS and AIDS-free generation. But of course, we can't end AIDS without a cure.
Right.
And you're hunting for one. So will you give everyone an update on where we are in the hunt?
Well, you know, I think it's interesting. It's almost as if there are parallel conversations going on around how to end AIDS. There's a lot we can do to end AIDS now with the tools that we have.
Right.
But the reality is, we don't get this epidemic really under control. We don't really end this epidemic until we have a vaccine to prevent new infections and a cure for the 34 million people living with HIV.
Can we pause there for 1 second? I think a lot of people don't understand the numbers. I mean, when we talk about good news, 8 million people in care, that's fantastic.
Right.
But with 34 million people living with the virus, we're still talking about 26 million people not in care right now, and 750,000 of them are Americans.
That's right. And we talk about how many people don't have access to treatment today, who aren't getting access to the drugs. And very often I hear this number kicked around that says, you know, about half of the people who need access to treatment aren't getting them. Even if half of the people who needed access to treatment got it, you'd still be at 16 million out of 34 million. And I actually think that the science is rapidly moving towards a point where we're going to recognize that everybody who has HIV needs treatment. So the numbers are a little misleading. The cure becomes a critical component of ending the epidemic, because the reality is, for those 34 million living with HIV, treatment will never be a cure. Right, and it's all it really does for us is it buys time.
Right.
Because treatment is still complicated, it's still difficult.
Stigmatizing.
It's stigmatizing. There are still complications of the disease process itself, even for people who are on treatment.
Right.
So ultimately, what we really have to get to is a cure, and there's a tremendous amount of excitement about that. Most people by now are familiar with the Timothy Brown story, the Berlin patient. They're familiar with the idea that we have passed the hurdle of proof of concept, right? We have proof of concept now that curing people is possible. We know that. The question is, how do you replicate the circumstances of the Timothy Brown case, the Berlin patient, without the significant risk that he undertook in order to get there?
Because he had the stem cell transplant,
That's
which one only does when one is
facing a significant illness, and he was, having been diagnosed with leukemia on top of his HIV. And the reality is, stem cell transplants, as we know them today, are not a scalable intervention, right? We can't scale up and start giving people stem cell transplants because it's simply too dangerous and too expensive to do. So what a lot of the research is focused on is the viral reservoir. The virus that exists anatomically in the body but isn't actually replicating, right?
And people have asked me, where is that? Is that gut? Is that brain? Where are these reservoirs?
Well, I think people make a mistake when they think of the location of reservoirs as geographical, right? Because while they may be geographical, while there may be geographically conserved regions of the body, like you say, the brain, the gut, the thyroid, other places which may have viral reservoirs, I think it's more important to think of reservoirs as cell lines, right? The cells in which these viruses exist, in which they're not replicating, and identifying those, and then figuring out how we basically attack them. Because what we want to do is one of two things. We want to try to turn them on so that they start replicating, so that the interventions that we have can begin to influence the size and scope of those reservoirs. And ultimately, what we want to be able to do is eradicate them. So it's a real challenge, and we've got to overcome these challenges. But they are largely technological challenges. They are largely challenges which we can really articulate very clearly, and hopefully through the kind of innovation that Bill Gates talked about the other day, we can come up with the kind of technology that will help us to overcome those things. But we don't have all the tools we need. Viral load, for example, as specific and wonderful as viral load is today, a tool that 15 years ago we didn't have, it is actually, in the context of viral reservoirs, a very blunt instrument. It's not, going to give us the information we need.
It's not necessarily undetectable, it's just undetectable to that test.
That's right, to the level of sensitivity that test provides. But viral loads tell us nothing about where the viruses are coming from. Are they coming from the viral reservoirs? How big are the viral reservoirs? How do we know that the reservoirs have been activated? So there are a number of studies that are being presented here during the context of this conference that are trying to look at different agents to stimulate these viral reservoirs. So there's a lot of complex science going on around it, but everybody's very excited about it.
So we have proof of concept, we need new tools to activate the virus, and we need to be able to measure what's going on and where it's coming from in the body. And then we can potentially, everyone asked me this question, what do we really need to cure AIDS? I mean, is it, is it a function of dollars? Is it political will? Is it where we put the money? Is it how we do research? Is all these things together?
It's all those things together. Now that we can identify and articulate the technological challenges to a cure, we need to change the way we do research in order to be able to attack it from a problem-solving research. What we want to do at amfAR is switch that model on its head and say, we're going to put together a group of the smartest and the best people who are working in this, not necessarily all in AIDS, but in different disciplines, and say, here's the roadmap. We have 7 scientific challenges. Now we want to go out and get the best minds out there, and we want to contract them to answer these questions. We want to say, we're going to give you the money that it takes to run your lab for the next 5 years.
To answer this question.
To answer this question. So we're not going to wake up one morning and somebody go, oh, aha, I found the cure.
Right.
What we're going to do is we're going to wake up one morning to find that somebody else has been cured. Right? We're going to find patient 2. And then there are going to be 4 people. And then there's going to be 8 people. And pretty soon we're going to figure out what the central elements of that were. We're going to start to make that easier to do and safer to do and hopefully eventually cheaper to do. But once that starts to happen, you can imagine the effect that that has in terms of hope.